Hello, welcome to the Week 3 lecture. This is divided into 3 parts: making content, content business models, and monetizing content. So let's just stop for a minute and review here. In part 1 we talked about communication technologies, and it was largely from the standpoint of receivers and the kinds of devices that we use. In Week 2 we talked about the underlying infrastructure that makes content distribution possible. And now I want to cover how digital technologies have affected the way that content for communication technologies is created, because there's a completely different infrastructure now, and if you work in the world of communication you need to address how messages are now made. So one of the words for messages in a general way is content. So we're going to start with making content. Okay, here we go. So again, just before we get started, let me talk about the learning outcomes. So for this week, they'll compare the emergence, diffusion, and evolution of communication technologies, and that does include the underlying infrastructures. Compare content types that are afforded by different technologies, and examine how they affect existing or legacy communication technologies and media platforms. Okay. All right. In the last 2 decades, there has been a complete revolution in content, both in how it's made and how it's distributed. And the main reason for that has been the proliferation of devices at the consumer end, the way that consumers find, extract, pay for, and consume media products. And you can see from this slide that there are many different ways that content providers have to be prepared for consumers to use their content. So it might have to be on analog TV in some countries, say Kazakhstan or Sri Lanka. It has to be digital TV for the first world, the United States or Europe. It might have to be broadband TV for Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, other high-speed networked countries. They may want to have enhanced TV, which is where you would have people getting it on the net but having hotspots so that they can click on television. You may soon see people getting video in their cars, obviously on the internet, on personal and mobile devices. So I guess that's my point, is that there's all these ways of distributing media, and it's no great surprise that there's also differences in how it's made. Okay, this is what I call a digital assembly line. And let's start right here in the program creation phase. Okay, you have development, pre-production, and production and post-production. Those are kind of the standard ways of producing media since late in the 19th century that was developed for movies, and those are understood categories. And then once you're out of post-production and you have a content product, you go into marketing, distribution, and delivery. Now notice up here this content management piece. Okay. That is typically in the product creation phase called digital asset management, and that is accomplished through digital asset management systems. Assets, as in digital asset management, assets are video, images, audio, text, interactive hotspots. So all of the items that go into creating a content product are individual assets, and that's why in the production phase, in the creation phase, these are referred to as assets, and they're edited in different ways for different platforms and for different purposes. As we move into marketing, distribution, delivery, and consumption, you tend to have content management systems, or CMS. Content management systems deal with output, with producing or with creating the content and formatting it in such a way as to be used on different devices. So if you think about it, the content that you produce for HDTV is very different than the content that you're going to produce for your phone. Even though they both may be a documentary about traveling on trains, the large-scale format for HD TV, say over Showtime or HBO, is for a much bigger screen, and you're going to need a much less complicated screen for a mobile device, and probably because of bandwidth considerations it may have to be compressed a great deal more. As we move down this digital assembly line, what we find now is that consumer payments, settlements, licensing fees, royalties, and profits back to participants all take place on digital platforms. The consumer pays through PayPal, the settlement is done through banks on electronic systems, licensing fees are written into the bank or software of the payer, royalties are automatically calculated, and profit participants receive their money through the electronic transfer to their bank. So what we have here is an entire digital assembly line for the creation, distribution, consumption, payment, and royalty distribution of content products. So this is a schematic of what if someone worked in professional television, this was what you would expect to find. Okay, so on this side, starting here on the left, is acquisition. How is programming acquired, or content? Some of it is produced, so you have a studio and you have all the elements of a production studio. And then you have distribution, which in television would be called transmission. And here you have all of these types of distribution, and indeed many, many more that we've been talking about. Cable feed, satellite, broadcasting. But in addition to that, you have the internet, and you have mobile devices and all the other ways of getting media that we now have. And all of this is archived here in storage. When it's used in production for editing, then this would be digital assets. And when it's output, these would be content management. And you see the same kind of change in movie making. Let's look at professional filmmaking in Hollywood or London or Paris. So you have input of what's shot on film. You have some video that someone may have taken. And you also have computer-generated imagery to an increasing degree. Probably 1/3 of films is CGI, as this is called. Then you have the processing stage, where people generally make an edit list based on work prints, and even before that based on a paper edit. And eventually this makes its way to an edit decision list, and all of these elements are placed in it. And then they have what's called dirt cleanup. They bring the images up to 2,000 pixels by 2,000 pixels usually, sometimes to 4,000 by 4,000 pixels, and they clean up any of the video grain or film grain or any dirt that may have attached itself to the physical film. And then they add in the digital effects, so that'll be the computer-generated imagery and some of the digital optical effects, and then some of the visual effects that may have been created. All of these elements will be put together to have the color be correct across, so that you don't see the difference in the elements. Make sure that the image is sharp and that there is not so much noise in the picture as much as it can be done. Then this material is actually filmed again and put in a film negative master, and then that is digitized to create a digital distribution master on video, and then a digital distribution master for digital cinema. And then after that, what you don't see are all the various outputs that may occur from the big screen through small mobile devices. Okay, and here we see kind of a redo of a broadcast facility. And it could be motion picture too, of what goes into a network. So here you see asset management databases. So this is where the material is stored in large part, and then video file servers and tape decks and so forth. So you can get an idea of what people think that looks like. This was created by SMPTE, Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, and the EBU, the European Broadcasting Union. Now, when you think about a digital assembly line, let's go back 100 years. And let's look at what the manual assembly line did for Ford Motor Company. And this looks at the output after the introduction of the assembly line and the kind of efficiencies. Look at within that 7-year period of how many cars they were able to produce. Now, you know how much we love cars, so to some extent the demand was there. And probably if they could have produced 2 million in 1913, they would have. Okay, so in the 5 years between 1914 and 1919, look what happened. So there you see the effect of having a rationalized work process that's on a single kind of platform, and it's anticipated that this will happen in the digital assembly line as well, even though some of the last pieces of the payment system and the royalty calculation and distribution system have yet really to be made. Okay. Here we go. So here is an idea to give you digital asset management and content management, okay? So this is the digital asset management side here, all the different inputs that go in. And then once it's constructed, it goes into a content server, and you have a content management system that feeds into distribution. And so here they have NTSC television, internet, digital television, high definition television, okay, and so forth. So I know I'm making the same point over and over again, but I really want you to have a very clear idea of how that works. Now, I'm just going to fast forward a minute, and then I'm going to come back to that other slide. When you distribute digital content, it is wrapped, okay, and the essence is the content. And metadata, meta means a level above, about. So if we thought of the content as data, metadata would be data about the data, okay? So the content itself is called content or essence. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So you have this essence here. Here's a scene on a beach and the audio that goes with it. And then here's information about it. Okay, what could that information be? Well, it could tell you how long it is, what format it's in, who produced it, how it was produced, and on what machinery. You could have spaces for any kind of information you wanted. It really doesn't care. It's a track. It's a special track, and you can see it over here on storage. It's a special track of data about the essence that is stored and attached to it and always goes with it. So now let's go back here and look again at metadata and the content package and how to use it. Okay, so here are these content packages. You see them here. And this, for example, sometimes you have either internet affiliates or broadcast affiliates. So what they've done is created metadata for each affiliate. It's unique for each one. So this affiliate may get charged X amount, and another affiliate may get charged Y amount, so that it allows for flexibility in the metadata that describes how much it costs and under what conditions it can be downloaded. And these rules can be absolutely unique for each one, so that what affiliate A gets is different from what affiliate B gets. Okay, so yes, I'm going to make this point one more time. Why do you need a content management system? Well, look, okay, here the content is created and it goes to some kind of distributor or somebody who buys the content as a kind of middleman. And there's some kind of agreement between all the parties, okay? And now it has to be distributed. And you have to have some kind of server and some kind of processing that prepares the material for each kind of outlet. And believe me, they're all different, and some of them are very different. So you have physical systems where you have media that's going into theaters or concerts, nightclubs, kiosks, whatever. You have wireless systems, and there bandwidth is always as a priority, so you can expect to have to compress a lot. Satellite, broadcast, mobile, Wi-Fi, and so forth. And then you have the wired systems, where often you don't have to compress as much, especially for high-speed cable. For you as a content creator, it means that you may want to have alternative shots. You know, you may really want to have high-quality computer-generated imagery or live footage with very complex moving images for a large screen, which can easily handle that kind of detail. And you may want to substitute less complex kinds of images for, say, a Wi-Fi system or a cell phone. And so it comes out of these different channels and is consumed by an audience on all these different devices. So that's why you have content management. Okay. So here I'm going to look at these media platforms. And you see why bandwidth is so important, because it really determines the kind of messages that you can send. So as a content creator, or in your careers as communicators, one of the things that you always want to know is what media platforms is this content going to go over? How is it going to be distributed across many platforms, one platform? And if it's going to be many, then you have to think about how to create that content for the different systems. Even if they're only minor adjustments, it can make a big difference to your audience. So motion pictures, as we mentioned, the bandwidth is very high, and so you can have absolutely the highest quality moving images and sound, but I think it would be pretty boring to try to read a book on film. So, you know, typically that isn't done except for microfilm, which is a whole other medium. And similarly, broadcast and cable television now take quite high quality moving images and sound, not as high as motion pictures. And so again, you won't get the detail and clarity and fidelity and brilliant color that you do on a motion picture screen, but it's pretty darn good. And again, not so hot for text. Mobile phones, the previous generation G3, which many people still have, allows low resolution moving images, moderate quality sound, adequate for text, but those moving images are not going to be great, and they may not be all that smooth either. But if you step up to G4, you get back to a pretty high bandwidth situation. A lot of compression still, but much higher. And depending on how the system is actually built, it could be very high indeed. So for G4, for military purposes, is absolutely fabulous. G4 is a standard that was developed by the United States taxpayer, and it was developed largely for military purposes to allow for the transmission of high-quality images over wireless media. So it allows, depending on how the system itself is configured, from medium to high-quality moving images, high-quality sound, great for text, but really depending on the receiver screen more than anything. And compare that to 56K internet dial-up, which had low bandwidth. Really, you couldn't do moving images very well. They didn't really move very much, and it was very slow, and you had to wait a long time. Sound was okay, MP3 files especially, and it was perfectly fine for text. When you move to broadband, you get pretty good quality moving images, although on my system, you know, it's okay, but I have to wait sometimes for it to rebuffer. Excellent sound animation, excellent text. It's really snappy for all that. When we move to Internet 2, which should happen sometime in the next decade, it's going to be a whole other ballgame. It's so high bandwidth. It's fantastic. And so they talk about holograms and what amounts to a virtual telepresence, which is, you know, so much data being transmitted that it's almost like having the person there, almost like being there. So we've produced all this content in a new way, and we've figured out how to move it around on networks, and we've created some payment gateways for it. How are people developing business models? How are we going to make money from it? And how do organizations think about that? Well, the first thing is we need to look at what's called a value chain. And a value chain essentially describes how do people add value in order to charge. Okay. So first of all, there has to be an infrastructure, and that means there has to be a way for the money to move. Okay. And we've talked about a little earlier that a lot of that is present, not entirely, but a lot of it. You need people and human resources. You need technologies, and you need the actual business arrangements and how to create those partnerships. And as you look across the bottom, you can see these are the different phases where there are opportunities. These are the primary activities that allow people to add value to services. So in general, these support activities are seen as cost centers, and the primary activities are seen as profit centers. Okay, so here's a detailed look at the content value chain. Every industry, every product, generally speaking, has its own value chain. So this is for digital content. Okay. So we're going to start here on the left with content or programming. And there's physical transport. You can send it in the mail, you can put it on a DVD, and if you do that, then it usually goes to some form of bricks and mortar commerce. That could be a theater, that could be a Walmart, that could be a drugstore, and so forth. And when you have a physical product, then you have the issues of warehousing and inventory, customer relation management. Tracking sales data is a little more difficult than in the digital world. Somebody actually has to account for that and provide honest numbers, and that doesn't always happen. And then you have to have some kind of retail sales outlet, which implies a payment kiosk and some kind of record of what sells. Again, there's some kind of a slip between what's actually sold and what's recorded and reported. When you have a digital product that is sent over a network, you have to provision the network. The network has to accommodate or afford the size of the content that you're sending. And then there's the whole transmission issue and basically the infrastructure of the network. You also need a platform for payment. And that payment has to be considered of how you're going to design it and manage it to keep track of money. This is really, people start caring when you start spending money. You also need some kind of customer relation management, and that has proved to be quite difficult to accommodate. It is still not clear in the digital world who's responsible. And I don't know how it has been for you, but many times for me there's been somebody who says, oh yeah, call this one, call that one, call another one, and you end up calling 4 companies to find out why your software isn't working. You know, the software company says, oh, it's your computer, call the computer help desk. You call the computer people, they say, oh, well, we think it's the software. You call someone else and they say, oh, well, it's the way you did it and it's your development. So you can get basically on some kind of telephone tree hell forever. And then there is a whole kind of sales logistics issue of having a smooth, frictionless sales environment and provisioning the person to be able to get the product. I've had a couple of situations where I bought some software and they didn't just send me a link to download it. There was like some 24 or 48 hour wait, and I'm feeling like, hey, I spent my money, where's my product? So these are not always adequately set out. And okay, and they provide value back in the form of money to the seller, which makes its way back to all the people who are involved in the production, hopefully. Let's begin talking about a business plan and a business model, because they're actually a little bit different. Your business plan is a really detailed assembly of how you're going to finance your business, how you're going to create, develop, design, and distribute your products, the logistics of getting the materials that go into it, any existing contracts that you may have, who's going to be part of the company, who's going to be the creative, what's going to provide the creative pieces, how you're going to earn money, how you're going to distribute that money to the various participants and so forth. So this is the business plan that you're going to use to actually start your business and that you're going to follow. A business model, on the other hand, is not necessarily very detailed. It's like the pattern for sewing a dress. It's not the dress, it's kind of the architecture for how the dress will be made, and if you plug in the various pieces, then you should come out with an actual dress. If you plug in cloth and you plug in sewing and you plug in thread and human labor, then at the end of it you should have a dress. So there is a way of organizing content business models. In order to really describe a content business model, you need 4 parts. The first part is the content model, how you're going to acquire or create the content. The second is a marketing model, how are you going to sell it to consumers, and what is your strategy for actually creating a market for this content. Your distribution models, how are you going to get it to people, what networks are you going to use, and how are you going to make that possible to actually for people to receive it and consume it. And finally, a revenue model, and the revenue model is how are you going to make money, how are you going to be profitable. When people talk about a business model, they almost always talk about the revenue model. But in fact, you have to have all these pieces. So when you talk about a content business model, there are things that you want to consider. And you can have innovative processes in each one of them that help make the business as a whole profitable. In the chapter that you were asked to read in Cash Flow, you're going to see many, many business models, and you should really make a list of them and try to get to know them. Because in your career you're going to hear a lot about business models and how they are. The basic rule here is if you have eyeballs, in other words, if you have a large number of consumers like a Google or a YouTube, then you sell advertising or ways to reach the consumer for marketers and PR people. If you don't really have eyeballs, but you do have wonderful content, then you sell subscriptions or some kind of access fee by consumers. So this is kind of the big main rule, and as you go through and look at various ways that people sell content, keep this division in mind. Okay, so how does that money get back? And how does a person, a creator of a digital product, make sure that they get paid? There's a whole variety of technologies that are involved in that. DRM stands for Digital Rights Management, and they are systems that are designed to protect content that we're all familiar with, even if we don't know that name. Now, you should be aware that the protection of intellectual property is actually a constitutional right, and it is it's the creators of intellectual property have a right to profit from their labors, and that has been affected by congressional law as to how long it's protected and so forth, but it's a fundamental right under the Constitution. Okay, so here's how it kind of works. Okay, there's publishers kind of manage the content, and then there's the people who hold the rights. Now the rights may or may not be the person that created it, because if you sell a book, you transfer those rights to the publisher, and similarly a screenwriter transfer those rights to the studio or the production company. And there's the person who actually sells it, because the publisher doesn't actually sell it. The publisher distributes it to bookstores, and the movies to theater owners, and television to networks and various cable networks. So each of those entities has a business model. we're going to get more into business models, but for now, let's just think of it as this is how the company expects to make money. Okay. And there's a variety of different ways to format this material, so that's what it's referring to. The DOI is an international specification for identifying content or essence. XRML is a way of specifying who owns the rights and what rights do they own. ICE is a format for the metadata so that it can be interpreted by any number of machines, both in distribution and in consumption by the audience. And then there's all kinds of really proprietary formats and players. So the content package may in fact have any number of specifications for the various information that goes into the content package. The e-commerce, that's the piece of it, the payment piece, and that is various kinds of payments from PayPal to credit cards and so forth. Transaction systems with individual sites, and also there are DRM vendors who, for example, if you create an ebook and you write it, you want to sell it, you can subscribe. You can get a software called NeoBook, or any number of them. I'm just using this as an example. And it will package your book, it will put a DRM wrapper around it, and it will set up an e-commerce back-end office for you. And people will go on and they will distribute your ebook and pay you the money, and you will give them a percentage, whatever that might be, sometimes high, sometimes not. You can also do that for an ebook, for example, with Kindle. You could probably sell music on Amazon exactly like this. So in a sense, Amazon becomes a DRM vendor, or provides secure distribution of DRM protected content. And finally, it's formatted for the internet in these various formats. Okay, so for digital rights management, there are three kinds of rights. The first one is what right, let's just talk about you as a consumer for a minute. What right do you have to make it available to yourself, to render it, to print it, or to copy it? And so that's print, view, play, and so forth. And so you, for example, in the ebook that you were given an assignment for in week 1, you have the right to read it, but you didn't have the right to download it or even to copy much of it. So you did not have render rights, except for viewing. That was the only render right you have. You couldn't print it, and playing didn't apply. Transport right. Can you copy it? And the answer to the ebook you use, no. And many times that's true of CDs, and it's certainly true of DVDs that have DRM on them to keep you from copying it. Can you move it? This arises with ebooks. You can have your ebook on your Kindle, but once you've downloaded it to your Kindle, you can't download it to a second device like an iPad, and you can't usually loan it out to somebody else. And then there's, what derivative rights do you have in terms of passing it on? And that is, can you take it out of the wrapper? And many things you can. You download a piece of software, for example. Are you allowed to change it? Are you allowed to embed it? So there are a lot of, like YouTube gives you the right, gives you the embed code, so you can take a video, put it on YouTube, embed that code into your website and click on it, and it plays out of YouTube, but it's embedded on your site.